Life wasn't easy, but it was mine. Confined to a wheelchair after a car accident 10 years ago, I'd rebuilt my life brick by painstaking brick. My little house, a modest two-bedroom bungalow in a quiet suburban neighborhood, was my sanctuary. It was adapted to my needs, filled with the things I loved, and most importantly, it was mine. I'd poured my heart and soul into making it a home. Then came the letter. Official looking, stiff, and oozing with that passive-aggressive HOA scent. I recognized the return address instantly, the Briarwood Estates Homeowners Association. My blood ran cold. I knew, deep down, this wasn't going to be pleasant. I carefully sliced open the envelope with a letter opener, my hands, gnarled from years of rehab, fumbling slightly. The letter was addressed to Mr. Jeffrey Thompson, resident. Not even homeowner, just resident. Already, I felt a prickle of unease. The language was formal, bordering on hostile. It informed me that the HOA had received multiple complaints regarding my property. Vague, I know. It went on to list a series of supposed violations: overgrown lawn, improper landscaping, unapproved exterior modifications, and general neglect of the property. Each accusation felt like a slap in the face. My lawn was meticulously maintained by a local landscaping crew I paid handsomely. My landscaping was even featured in the local paper last year, as a wheelchair-friendly garden. And the modifications to my home, the ramp leading to the front door, the widened doorways, were all permitted and approved by the city years ago under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled threat: failure to rectify these violations within 30 days may result in further action, including fines, legal proceedings, and potential eviction. Eviction. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Eviction from my home? The home I'd worked so hard to keep? The home that represented my independence, my resilience, my very life? I crumpled the letter in my fist, my anger warring with a cold, gnawing fear. I knew exactly who was behind this: Karen Miller, president of the HOA, a woman who exuded entitlement like a perfume, her perfectly coiffed hair and surgically tightened face a mask for the venom that dripped from her tongue. She'd been giving me sideways glances ever since I moved in 5 years ago, her lips pursed in disapproval whenever I was outside. I was the only black man on the block, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that my race and my disability made me an easy target for her brand of petty tyranny. It wasn't about unkempt lawns or unapproved modifications, it was about control, power, and a deep-seated prejudice that pulsed beneath the surface. This was about her wanting me gone. It was about her wanting to control the narrative of her perfect little neighborhood. This was Karen's world, and I was just living in it, or so she thought. I decided to confront Karen directly. I wasn't going to cower in fear and let her bully me out of my home. I meticulously documented everything: photographs of my perfectly manicured lawn, copies of the city permits for my modifications, receipts from the landscaping company. Armed with this evidence, I wheeled myself to her house, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and righteous anger. Her house was the epitome of suburban perfection, a 2-story colonial with immaculate landscaping, a pristine white picket fence, and a perfectly symmetrical facade. The kind of house that screamed, "Stay off my lawn." I rang the doorbell, and after what felt like an eternity, she opened the door, her face etched with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Jeff," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise." "I need to talk to you about the letter I received," I said, holding up a copy of the HOA notice. She sighed dramatically. "Oh, that. Well, I'm very busy, Jeff. Can't this wait?" "No, it can't wait," I said, my voice hardening. "These accusations are false and discriminatory. My lawn is perfectly maintained, and my modifications are fully permitted." She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "Well, the other residents have expressed concerns. They feel that your property doesn't meet the standards of the community." "What standards?" I demanded. The standard of being white and able-bodied? Her face flushed. That's a ridiculous accusation. I am not a racist. Then explain why I'm the only one receiving these complaints, I said, gesturing to my wheelchair. Is it because I'm black? Is it because I'm disabled? Or is it because you just don't like the way I look? I don't have to explain anything to you, she snapped. You're in violation of the HOA rules, and you need to rectify the situation immediately. I am not in violation of any rules, I countered, brandishing my documentation. Here are the permits for my modifications, and here are the receipts from my landscaping company. Show me where I'm in violation. She glanced at the documents dismissively. Those don't matter. The point is, your property is not up to par. And frankly, your presence is making some people uncomfortable. That was it. She'd finally said it out loud. Her prejudice, her disdain, her desire to erase me from her perfect little world. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over. You know what, Karen? I said, my voice shaking with rage. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, and I have every right to be here. I'm not going to let you bully me out of my property with your petty, discriminatory tactics. I'm going to fight you every step of the way. I turned my wheelchair around and wheeled away, leaving her standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, her face contorted with fury. She was wrong if she thought I would just give up and leave. I was here to stay. This was going to be a battle, and I was ready to fight. I knew I couldn't fight Karen alone. She had the power of the HOA behind her, and she was clearly willing to use it to make my life miserable. I needed allies, people who would stand with me against her prejudice and her abuse of power. I started by reaching out to my neighbors. I'd always been friendly, waving hello, offering a hand when they needed it. Now, I needed them to return the favor. I explained my situation, showed them the HOA letter, and told them about my confrontation with Karen. To my surprise, many of them were sympathetic. Some had even experienced Karen's overbearing behavior themselves. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who lived next door, admitted that Karen had once complained about her flower garden being too colorful. Mr. Henderson, a retired veteran, said that Karen had tried to dictate how he should display his American flag. They'd both felt intimidated and powerless, but they'd never spoken out. She's always been like that, Mrs. Rodriguez said, shaking her head. She thinks she owns the whole neighborhood. She's a bully, Mr. Henderson added. And she needs to be stopped. Together, we started a petition to remove Karen from her position as president of the HOA. We went door to door, explaining our cause and gathering signatures. Many people were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation from Karen. But as more and more people signed, they gained courage. They realized that they weren't alone, that there was strength in numbers. I also contacted a local civil rights attorney, Sarah Johnson. She listened to my story with a growing look of concern on her face. She explained that Karen's actions could be considered discriminatory and a violation of the Fair Housing Act. She offered to represent me pro bono, seeing my case as an important example of standing up against prejudice and abuse of power. This isn't just about your home, Jeff, she said. It's about sending a message that discrimination will not be tolerated. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win. With Sarah on my side and a growing coalition of neighbors behind me, I felt a surge of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies, and together, we were going to stand up to Karen and her reign of terror. The HOA meeting was a tense affair. The community hall was packed, every seat filled, with people standing along the walls. The air was thick with anticipation and barely concealed animosity. Karen sat at the head of the table, her face a mask of icy composure. She surveyed the room with a look of disdain, as if she couldn't believe that so many people had dared to challenge her authority. The meeting started with the usual formalities, but it wasn't long before the topic of my case came up. Karen presented her version of events, painting me as a negligent homeowner who was deliberately violating the HOA rules. She showed pictures of my house, carefully cropped to make it look as unkempt as possible. She repeated her accusations, her voice dripping with condescension. Then it was my turn to speak. I wheeled myself to the front of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I told my story, from the initial letter to the confrontational meeting with Karen. I showed the documentation I had gathered, the permits, the receipts, the photographs. I spoke about the emotional toll that Karen's actions had taken on me, the fear, the anxiety, the feeling of being targeted and discriminated against. As I spoke, I could see the expressions on people's faces changing. Some were nodding in agreement, others were shaking their heads in disbelief. Even some of Karen's supporters seemed to be wavering. Then, Sarah Johnson, my attorney, took the floor. She spoke eloquently about the Fair Housing Act, about the importance of protecting people from discrimination, and about the legal implications of Karen's actions. She argued that Karen had abused her power as president of the HOA, that she had targeted me based on my race and disability, and that she should be removed from her position immediately. After Sarah spoke, the floor was opened for public comment. One by one, my neighbors stood up and shared their own experiences with Karen. Mrs. Rodriguez talked about her flower garden, Mr. Henderson talked about his American flag, and others shared similar stories of Karen's overbearing behavior and petty tyranny. The tide was turning. People were seeing Karen for who she truly was, a bully, a racist, and an abuser of power. Finally, it was time for the vote. The question was simple: should Karen Miller be removed from her position as president of the HOA? The votes were tallied, and the results were announced, an overwhelming majority in favor of her removal. A collective gasp filled the room. Karen's face turned white with shock and disbelief. She had lost. Her reign of terror was over. With Karen out of the HOA, I thought the worst was behind me. I could finally breathe, finally feel safe in my own home. But the universe, it seemed, had one more twist in store. A few weeks after the HOA meeting, I received an anonymous letter. Inside was a USB drive and a short, handwritten note: look into the HOA finances. My curiosity piqued, I plugged the drive into my computer. What I found was shocking. The drive contained a trove of financial documents, bank statements, invoices, and emails, all related to the HOA. As I scrolled through the files, I discovered a pattern of suspicious activity. There were unauthorized withdrawals, inflated invoices, and payments to shell corporations. It became clear that Karen had been embezzling money from the HOA for years, using her position to enrich herself at the expense of her neighbors. The evidence was damning. She had been siphoning funds from the community for personal expenses, lavish vacations, designer clothes, and even renovations to her own home. The amount she had stolen was staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars that belonged to the homeowners of Briarwood Estates. I immediately contacted Sarah Johnson with my findings. She was stunned by the evidence. She told me that this was no longer just a civil rights case, it was a criminal matter. She advised me to turn over the evidence to the local authorities, which I did without hesitation. The police launched an investigation, and it didn't take long for them to confirm the truth of the allegations. Karen was arrested and charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. The news sent shockwaves through the community. People were outraged, betrayed by the woman they had trusted to manage their finances. The trial was a media circus. Karen, once the queen of Briarwood Estates, was now vilified in the press. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, the financial records, the bank statements, the emails, all proving her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Karen tried to defend herself, claiming that the transactions were legitimate business expenses, that she had been acting in the best interests of the community. But her lies were transparent, and the jury saw through them. After a week of testimony, the jury reached a verdict: guilty on all counts. Karen was sentenced to several years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA. Her assets were seized, and her ill-gotten gains were returned to the community. With Karen behind bars and the stolen money recovered, Briarwood Estates began to heal. The HOA elected a new president, a fair and compassionate woman who was committed to transparency and community building. The atmosphere in the neighborhood improved dramatically. People were friendlier, more supportive, and more willing to work together. As for me, I finally found peace. The threat of eviction was gone, the discrimination had ended, and justice had been served. I could finally enjoy my home, my life, without fear or anxiety. The experience had been traumatic, but it had also been empowering. I had stood up to a bully, I had fought for my rights, and I had won. I had learned that even in the face of prejudice and adversity, it was possible to find strength, resilience, and hope. I still live in my little bungalow in Briarwood Estates. I still tend to my garden, I still wave hello to my neighbors, and I still take pride in my home. But now, there's something more, a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and a sense of justice. Karen Miller tried to take everything from me, but in the end, she only made me stronger. And in the process, she revealed her true colors and brought about her own downfall. My wheelchair might limit my mobility, but it doesn't limit my spirit. And that, I realized, is something no one can ever take away from me. The experience taught me that even the most powerful bully can be brought down with enough courage and determination. Justice may be slow, but it always prevails. And sometimes, the most unexpected discoveries can lead to the most satisfying outcomes. I emerged from the ordeal stronger, more resilient, and with a renewed appreciation for the importance of fighting for what is right, no matter the odds.